Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. Afghans fleeing the Taliban are set to lose their temporary protected status in the U.S. in less than a week. The Trump administration canceled those protections, and now some asylum seekers are getting letters from the federal government asking them to leave immediately. That includes a man in our area. WRAL's Heidi Kirk spoke to him, and she joins me now. Heidi, thanks for being here.
Hey, Megan.
So what are these protections and how exactly do they work?
So essentially, temporary protected status, otherwise known as TPS, is a humanitarian program that allows people from certain countries to live and work in the U.S. for a limited time. Now, you'll typically hear people talk about this in countries that are facing conflicts or natural disasters. So think a hurricane comes in or a war happens. This is typically one of those instances when TPS would be granted by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, TPS sometimes can last a decade, sometimes it can last a year. It really just depends. And this is constantly the type of thing that the Department of Homeland Security is assessing and, granting protections or taking them away as needed.
Okay, some great background there. And I'm curious how exactly you met this man who fled the Taliban.
It is super interesting. So obviously we are so well connected in the Triangle community, and we actually got an email into our WRAL news inbox from someone who said that he heard about the issue of some of these protections being taken away at his church, which is Apostles Raleigh. And so he wrote into us and said, hey, I think this is something that you should look into. So of course, what we did is reached out to the church, connected with the pastor, and, he kind of gave us the backdrop of this. He said he's been doing a little bit of research on his own about some of these protections being taken away. And I asked him why he was doing that. And he said, well, our church has a large population of people from Afghanistan. So obviously that's something that he has a personal connection to. And as we started to pursue this story, we always want to talk to the people who it matters the most to. So we asked him, is there anyone that you know who, may have left Afghanistan, fled the Taliban, and can really speak to the issue here? And so he connected us with one man who did just that. And I will say we're not going to reveal his name. He does have some concerns that he could be a target for the Taliban even today, even though he's lived in the United States since 2023 legally, but we won't be revealing his name for that reason.
Okay, that makes sense. And, when exactly did he get this letter? Did you get a chance to see it, and what did it say?
Absolutely. So I actually have the letter open right in front of me. Now, he received this last week, and it kind of just looks like, honestly, the type of letter that you might get and think that it's spam. It has like a very official seal on the top, but it just comes from kind of a regular email address. It says, got a lot of information on it. As I'm pulling it up, I want to just kind of read a little bit of it to you here. The big subject line is, it's time for you to leave the United States. So that's kind of the initial message that these people are getting. And I'm going to read you the first line of it. It says, you are currently here because the Department of Homeland Security paroled you into the United States for a limited period of time. Now, if DHS is now exercising its discretion to terminate your parole. Unless it expires sooner, your parole will terminate 7 days from the date of this notice. So let's unpack that. Essentially people who, think that they're going to be in the United States for a temporary period of time while they have these protections, now being told they have to leave within 7 days. And then this next sentence is really what caught a lot of people off guard. It says, if you do not depart the United States immediately, you will be subject to potential law enforcement actions that will result in your removal from the United States. So very jarring for the people who received this email. A lot of people told me, wow, it's actually, something that I may have thought was a spam email, but it turns out that it's real. We checked with the Department of Homeland Security today. They say, yes, these are emails that we are sending out. And so, we did our due diligence there, and this is a very legitimate email that many people have received last week and into this week.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm sure that's very jarring to receive there. We're going to talk a bit more about how that man was feeling after getting this letter when we come back. So Heidi, how is the man feeling after receiving a letter like that?
Oh my gosh, it's hard to put into words, honestly. We talked a lot about that. And I think, the overarching word to describe it is just anxious. He left Afghanistan in 2023 because he did not feel safe there. He had converted to Christianity, and when the Taliban took over, he said that he was a direct target. He not only described his time in prison, but time that he was tortured, all because he was a Christian and the Taliban had taken over. So needless to say, he's very nervous about this. And of course, if he were to leave and have to go home, he actually called it a death sentence, which is something that really stuck with me. He said, if I had to go back to Afghanistan, regardless of how hard I tried to hide, he believes that he would be a direct target. And that's really scary for him. So he's really nervous. And he also has a lot of questions. He actually told me that he has a court date set up as he's trying to seek asylum and stay in the United States after he's fled the Taliban. And he said now he's wondering, do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? And I think that's kind of the general feeling from, everyone out there in this community that received this email. And regardless of their immigration status, of course, he's here legally, but, some people may not be. And I think it's something that's just really nerve-wracking for everyone involved in this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, with that being said, have we spoken to any other people who are going through this same thing in our area?
So we know of at least 17 families within the church, Apostles Raleigh. I know. So it's a pretty large amount of people just within this one congregation. And, the man that I spoke with is kind of acting as a spokesperson for them. He says he's very well connected. They actually have established a sect of the church that has services in their native language. And so he sometimes leads some of those. So again, someone who's really, really well connected. And what he told me is that they've been having a lot of conversations about this, within that congregation, just trying to figure out how they should proceed here. And so, that's just, I'm sure, a small sector of the Afghan community here. I asked this man and the pastor, do we know what, the greater population is like of people from Afghanistan here in the Triangle? And he said, there's a good amount of people. I heard the number, maybe a couple thousand, in our general area. I haven't done my due diligence to confirm that, but, it sounds like a good amount of people. And so it's possible that even more beyond that in our area got this email and are feeling a lot of the same emotions that this man I spoke to today is feeling.
Oh, yeah, I bet. And, Heidi, we'll just end with, I know you did mention that upcoming court date. Is there anything else regarding this story that we are still looking ahead to, or people maybe that you're waiting to hear back from? Absolutely.
Well, I think the next step for me as a reporter here is I want to talk to some immigration attorneys. I actually had a chance to talk to one on the phone briefly, and I said, how are you advising your clients? And she said, it almost sounds wrong for me to say, but I'm telling them they just need to, be aware of this, put this letter in their back pocket. But if they have a court date, in the future to get that asylum, they need to stick with that. And she said, that's my guidance today, but it's something that's evolving so quickly. I'll mention that, again, the man I spoke to, he is on an I-94 visa, which basically allows a person to stay in the U.S. for an amount of time while they seek asylum. So, that is what he's doing. And actually, the pastor at the church said everyone within his congregation, as far as he knows, is in that exact same situation. They're here legally. They're trying to get asylum. They can't go back to their home country because they're targets of the Taliban, et cetera, et cetera. And so, it's a really nerve-wracking time for those people. But, there's a lot of questions still out there. And I think that we need to get some answers as far as that goes. Of course, I'm going to stay connected with this man. And he said his court date is in mid-May, and he's going to try to, figure out what he should do up until then. But I think the way to wrap this up is just say there's a lot of questions out here. It's something that's evolving very quickly. And, given the current administration and a lot of their immigration plans, we're constantly getting updates on this type of thing. So I think it's important for us to continue doing our due diligence, asking these questions, and staying connected with the people who it's truly affecting.
Definitely. Yeah, well, Heidi, thanks so much for sharing his story and, of course, for staying on top of this. I'm sure we'll hear much more about this very soon from you.
Absolutely.
And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can find more podcasts from WRAL News at WRAL.com. Search podcast. From sports to true crime, there are plenty of shows to keep you informed and entertained. I'm Megan Glova. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.